Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's WBBA Webinar, How to Formulate Your Best Broadband Investment Strategy, brought to you by the World Broadband Association and broadcast by Informa. I'm Stephen Wilson, Senior Principal Analyst with WBBA, and I'll be your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. Moving on to the next slide. So this webinar is designed to be interactive. The dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen will allow you to learn about today's speakers, share this webinar via social media outlets, and participate in the Q&A session that takes place at the end of our presentation. The slides will automatically advance throughout the event. Now, toward the end of our webinar, we will ask you to complete our survey found on the right-hand side of your screen. Please take a minute to fill this out before leaving us today, as your feedback will provide us with valuable information on how we can improve future events. Lastly, if you are experiencing any technical problems, please click the help widget found at the bottom of your screen or type your issue into the Q&A area, and we will be glad to offer one-on-one assistance. So today's speakers, and on to the presentation on how to formulate your best broadband investment strategy. So discussing today's topic, you have me, Senior Principal Analyst Stephen Wilson at WBBA. We have Lonji Xu, Senior Technical Architect at China Telecom. We have Martin O'Brien, Senior Consultant Business Innovation at Huawei. Kevin Hazley, VP Strategic Initiatives at Ookla, WBBA Working Group Chair, and Anne-Marie de Gromar, Head of Net Strategy and Business Development at Swisscom. So I'm just going to hand over to Lonji Xu from China Telecom, who's going to tell us a little bit about a WBBA investment guidebook that has recently been published.
Hello, everyone. I'm
over to you.
Lonji from China Telecom. It's my pleasure to share our group's research result, Broadband Investment Guidebook. The guidebook provides considerable insight related to broadband investment to stakeholders. They include an overview of the key trends in global broadband investment, an analysis of the key supply, demand, and profit metrics for broadband investment, an analysis of changes to broadband investment and how to improve the viability of broadband infrastructure development, an analysis of different funding modes that can be used to enhance broadband infrastructure, an analysis of the business models for broadband infrastructures. These are the main content of our research broadband investment guidebooks. You can also download at WBBA's official broadband website. Second, I will share you how to use the guidebook. The guidebook lists out the options for these different stakeholders that are looking to make success of the investment in broadband infrastructure. For those embarking on considering investment in broadband infrastructure, the guidebook provides a useful input on the basic metrics demanding the business case. You can see the key metric stakeholders must consider chapter of our guidebook. Secondly, for these seasonal inventors, the guidebook to provide comparison of how these key metrics can vary between and within countries. You also can see the key metrics stakeholders must consider chapter. Thirdly, the guidebook will also assist stakeholders that are wrestling with questions of how improve the business cases for investing broadband infrastructure. You can see the improving viability of investment in broadband infrastructure chapter. Those considering how finance a broadband infrastructure rollout can use the guidebook to look at all different options available. You can see broadband finance model choices chapter. At last, the guidebook can also serve as a source of inspiration for stakeholders that are considering which business model. You can see the broadband business model choices. I just make a start. Next, our teammate Steven will give you more details and professional about our introduction of the guidebook. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for that. So just a little bit more information on the guidebook that we have published. Again, that's available on the WBBA website. So one of the sort of introductory parts to this is about global broadband investment and the areas of focus for that investment. So the first point to note here is that much of the global focus of investment in broadband infrastructure is on the rollout of FTTP. So that's really what we show in the chart on the right side. This is FTTP coverage of total country premises for selected countries. So the orange bar, that's for the 1st of January 2020, and the blue bar, that's for the 1st of January 2023. And you can see obviously some leading countries there are at or close to 100% coverage. But what we also note is that across multiple regions, there's been really a large increase in fiber to the premises coverage. So you can see the differences between the orange and the blue bars, and that reflects this very substantial investment that is taking place in fiber to the premises, and that continues to take place. And we will see many countries sort of getting up to the levels of the countries that we see are already at the left-hand side of this chart. So that's one thing to know. I think in terms of global broadband investment, a further important trend is the increasing volume of deployments of next-generation PON fiber technologies, with shared capacities of 10 gigabit per second and above. So certainly growing interest in there, growing interest in offering multi-gigabit access plans, growing interest in using PON for multiple applications, whether it's residential, enterprise, or mobile transport, accommodating growth in traffic. So many reasons to operators are moving to next generation PON. And there's also investment away from the access network as well. So for data center networks, AI elaboration needs are increasing sharply. In the WAN network, the use of 400 gigabit links will increase in coming years. And investment in building Wi-Fi networks is also growing. And we do see a trend and quite a rapid adoption with operators increasingly deploying Wi-Fi 7. So that's some of the areas of focus that we talk about in our guidebook. And what we also talk about is the key metrics stakeholders must consider when investing in broadband infrastructure. So I think there are sort of three buckets here, if you like. So when investing in broadband infrastructure, stakeholders must consider firstly supply-side metrics. So you might typically think about cost per premises passed, but also cost per premises connected or connection costs when subscribers actually sign up and commit to a service. And these are two very important metrics, and they will vary considerably both between and within countries. So that is what we show in the chart on the right side. This is FTTP cost per premises passed by selected operator. And you can see sort of at the higher end examples where it's $1,000 and could certainly be more than that in some more rural deployments too. But then we see, as we go into some of the lower income markets, certainly cost per premises passed of less than $100 US are there. There are plenty of examples of that as well. So that's an important consideration, but also the demand side metrics. So the two demand side metrics really that investors need to consider is the subscriber take-up rate of premises passed. So typically for fiber to the home, we're starting to see sort of the best rates at sort of 70% plus of subscribers as a ratio of premises passed. And the average revenue per user is important as well. Whilst in the US, that might be $60, $70. In many lower income markets, that might be less than $10. So these are all factors to consider, and these metrics will vary considerably between countries, and that will then have an impact on profitability and return on investment metrics. So investors must consider metrics like return on investment, net present value, and payback period, and all of these will be impacted significantly by these variations in the supply and demand side metrics. So investors are going to need to consider carefully these local characteristics and understand the particular circumstances of their deployment. So that's a bit of a taste of one of the sections in our guidebook. Now I'm going to hand over to Martin, who's going to talk about initiatives to improve broadband investment viability.
Thanks, Steve. So there are many issues with securing the viability of broadband investment. These issues can vary. There can be issues with obtaining finance. There can be issues with stimulating demand. And there can also be issues with reducing the rollout costs, as Steve has talked about earlier. The Broadband Advocacy Group has been active examining these issues and has created the Broadband Investment Guide in response to these issues. In addition to financial investment advice, the guide contains 94 initiatives that can be implemented by industry stakeholders like governments and operators in order to improve the viability of broadband investments. So here's a summary of the 94 initiatives in one slide. I know there's quite a lot to take in here. At a macro level, what this whole thing about really is about improving the viability of broadband infrastructure demand and consequently revenue, and also reducing the cost of supply. So taken together, that's kind of the broad goal of all these things together. On the supply side, as Steve has outlined earlier, the most important factor obviously is the cost of build out. On the demand side, the most important factors are maximizing number of homes passed and the take-up rate within those homes. There's multiple ways that you can group these initiatives. We just grouped them here by policy and regulation, by financial innovation, demand stimulation, rollout costs. But there are many ways you can group these initiatives, and we have different ways of doing that within the group. There are brief descriptions of all of these initiatives in the guide on pages 12 to 17, and we reference these in our next slides. The initiatives colored in yellow are detailed in a lot more detail in the guide, and you can read up about them in a lot more detail in the guide themselves. In total, there are too many initiatives to go through in detail here. So what I've done is I've picked some aggregations of these initiatives in order to give you a flavor of what's contained within the guide. As our group continues its work, the Broadband Advocacy Group continues its work, we'll deep dive into some more of these initiatives, and we've got plans to do that more and more in the future as well. So just a place or a slide on where you can find more details on these initiatives. It's on pages 12 to 17 of the guide. And as I said, we're going to be going into more details, and then you can see a screenshot of the guide here with a list of the descriptions, a list of initiatives, the descriptions of them, of the 94 that are in there that I just showed you on the previous slide. So here are some examples of some initiatives in the guides. I've kind of created aggregations of them here. So these are pools of initiatives that are pulled together under different titles here. So one example here would be innovative network technologies. So obviously there's no point having gigabit connections into homes or enterprises if the internal network technology is a bottleneck. So adoption of technologies like Wi-Fi 7 or fiber to the room or 400G WAN, they can all help to improve demand by improving user experience and enabling new applications. In addition, if they're well priced, they can stimulate demand, they can provide revenue opportunities for operators, and they can also be differentiating as well. There's lots of carriers that are adopting fiber to the room technology. They've been adopted by over 100 countries. There's also, as Steve has outlined, there are carriers that are implementing Wi-Fi 7 at the moment, for example, in China and Italy, but there's many other countries that are doing that as well. Another issue as well is about improving connectivity into buildings. So there's lots of initiatives around that as well. So when getting connectivity into buildings is a problem, governments can introduce regulations and policies, such as new building fiber regulations. So regulations so that new builds deploy fiber. They can include subsidies as well for deploying fiber within buildings. And they can also have initiatives to deploy fiber to public buildings in order to stimulate demand in that area as well. Building regulations, generally, they are a low-cost option, but they really have to be balanced as well with increasing construction costs. So governments need to be wary of that when they're engaging in those areas. Subsidies for improved in-building connectivity, they can be expensive to subsidize them. So really they need to be deployed where there is a market failure, where there's obviously it's expensive to deploy them, and you should only deploy them where you need to deploy them. Another issue as well, obviously, another range of measures will be things like adapting administrative approaches. So sometimes poor coordination, planning delays, and other barriers can hinder network rollout costs, and they can increase costs. So there's a range of measures that authorities can adopt in order to improve processes and to allow better coordinate and accelerate network rollouts. So some of these measures include things like permit exemptions, improved processes for streamlining dispute resolution, asset databases, dig once policies, or policies and approaches around improving sharing of assets. Again, these measures can be a low cost to the state, but they really do have to be balanced as well against some of the fundamental rights for property and other things as well. And some examples of this would be things like the EU 5G connectivity toolbox, which is now the Gigabit Act.
Yeah, so we just seem to have lost Martin temporarily there, so perhaps he will be able to rejoin shortly. But yes, I think as Martin was mentioning, sort of within this adapting administrative approaches bucket, there are some different examples there. So EU 5G connectivity toolbox, and in the Philippines as well, initiatives around anti-red tape authority. So those are some of the different examples, and there are some further examples here as well. So innovative construction techniques could be a way of improving the viability of broadband investment. So that could be things like...
I think I'm back online again, guys.
Ah, yes, fantastic. So
okay,
just to hand over to Martin, the innovative construction techniques.
Okay, thank you, guys. Sorry about that. So there's some other initiatives I'm going to go through here. So some examples will be things like innovative construction techniques. So in this case here, anything that can be done to reduce construction costs can definitely help to improve the viability of broadband. Operators in countries like Germany, Ireland have introduced measures like micro-trenching, pre-connectorization, repurposing of existing infrastructure like aerial fiber in order to improve the costs associated with rolling out infrastructure. Micro-trenching is an interesting one. It can reduce costs by over 80%, so it can be 80% faster. It can also reduce layout costs as well by a factor of 5. Pre-connectorization is interesting in that it reduces the need for skilled labor, which is obviously a lot costlier. There are trade-offs again associated with these type of techniques, in that they can be faster and easier to deploy, but you may sacrifice things like durability and longevity when you deploy some of these techniques, but not all of them. So these are being deployed in different countries, like in Germany, US and Ireland have deployed aerial fiber. There's other examples as well, like USOs. So in terms of initiatives, so we do cover different types of USOs within the guide as well. So in terms of USOs, there are different types of USOs. Really, the purpose of the USO is really is it requires all operators to provide some kind of broadband services, particularly in unprofitable or high-cost areas. There are lots of different types. They can be retail funded, they can be operator funded, they can be pool funded by pool of operators. They can be reserve funded, and there's state auctions. In aggregate, there's really kind of state funded, and there's also operator funded. So there's two kind of different types. In terms of effectiveness, they can be effective. Really, if the market can bear the cost of it. So like wholly owned funded USOs tend to be used in highly urbanized areas where the cost of rollout is low and the market can absorb the burden. Sometimes connectivity requirements can be set too low, and that can result in poor technology choices and bad services. You can also get issues as well with stranded assets in situations where there are not enough subsidies. So where the connectivity is provided, via subsidies, but users are not subsidized. So if they eventually will drop their connections, if they cannot obviously keep up those payments. So those things have to be watched in the case. Some examples of USOs would be things like the Connect America Fund and also the Rural Digital Fund in the US. And we're going to cover them a bit more within our group later on in a lot more detail. Other examples as well would be national broadband strategies. So some of these are also covered in the guide as well. So obviously national broadband strategies, they set out a course of action for development within a particular country. They tend to be, some countries tend to be more active than others in this area. Some of these plans can be very detailed. Other plans, they can be more high level or aspirational. The detailed plans, the good ones, set out actions and they set out financial commitments in terms of national broadband plans. So the national broadband plans, they can tend to be done early, and if they're done early, they can be quite good. If they're done, if they're done in a late fashion, then they can have problems in terms of interfering with the existing market. If they're done well, they require great insight, planning, and execution. And countries, they can take different approaches to it. Some common variants can include things like monopolies or state-owned wholesale national plans. Others are things like public-private partnerships or ex-ante restructuring. When they're well executed, they can be effective and they can reach a lot of hard-to-reach areas. When they're not well executed, they can tend to stifle market competition. They can not reach the areas that they're meant to cover, and they can be costly and implement the wrong technology choices. An example of a well-executed plan that's been touted recently are things like the Très Haut Débit plan in France. I think I've got a few more minutes left here anyway, so I can probably continue. So just the last few initiatives I'm going to cover here, things like initiatives around demand aggregation, digitization, network assets, and speed-focused approaches. So we've got, of the 94 initiatives that were mentioned earlier, these are kind of aggregations of some of these initiatives, and you can go through them in the guide when you look at it later. So in terms of demand aggregation, there are processes for bringing together parties to measure demand in underserved areas. So basically what this is about bringing together communities in underserved areas to encourage investment. It can be led by operators, it can be led by communities themselves, it can be led by investors. The different variants you get would be things like creation of communications unions, aggregation of public sector sites, or you can get community investment directly in these types of schemes. The advantages of them really is that it can really reduce deployment risks and waste associated with investment in promising areas. They can have strong take-up rates, and they can also have strong community commitment as well. On the downside, they can be time-consuming to organize, and they really have to be driven by skilled local volunteers, and those kind of people aren't always present in every community. The last two ones I'm going to focus about, if I've got time, I think I do just a little bit of time, would be the digitization of network assets and processes. So these initiatives center around the creation of digitization of things like network ducts, cables, and leaways. Some of the operators, some are kind of operator driven, some of them are driven by governments as well. There were different types, like duct mapping, digitalization of the ODN, and also service mapping. So in the investment guide, we describe a lot of these different types. In terms of the advantages of digitalization network assets, it can make the planning and design of the network more efficient and less error prone. And if you do have better data, you can also obviously as well make better decisions. So they do help make planning more efficient. On the downside, they can become a bit more complex and expensive to implement. And they can also, as well, they need to be obviously kept up to date, and it requires cooperation from all parties and asset owners in order for it to work well. There's examples of this in Germany and UK as well. Lastly, just in terms of speed-focused approaches, this is where you set mandatory speed targets for infrastructure deployment. The goal really is to help provide high-speed internet access everywhere. There are different variants. They can be national, they can be regional, and they can be effective at driving high speeds into rural areas, but obviously you have to watch what type of technology you deploy. It needs to be future-proofed. Otherwise, obviously, it can become obsolete very, very quickly. Some examples of this would be things like the UK Project Gigabit Plan and Italy's 1 Gigabit Plan as well. So that's it. I think I dropped out once, but I think we're solid for the rest of the way there. So let's hand over to you.
Yes, thank you, Martin. Just one sort of question from that. I mean, to what extent are governments, do you think, in a position to implement these ways to improve the viability of investment in broadband infrastructure? To what extent do you think governments kind of have a strong position to implement some of these measures that you talked about?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, they can always do something, and obviously it depends on the cost associated with it. Some of these measures, they cost money, others don't. So things like adapting administrative processes, building regulations, things like opening infrastructure, they're not a cost to the government. Other initiatives, for example, like the funded USOs and things like subsidies, they cost money. Really, when they're deciding to do this, there has to be a balance between those two things. Obviously, there's a cost associated with one thing, and in other cases where they implemented administrative processes or they adapt administrative processes, they've got to balance infrastructure, encouraging infrastructure and investment in infrastructure with fundamental rights as well.
Yes. Very good. Well, thank you very much, Martin. Very, very enlightening. Now we're going to hand over to Kevin Hazley from Ookla. So over to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Stephen. I think one of the last aspects that Martin highlighted in his presentation was very important for what Ookla stands for and what Ookla can deliver to help these investment decisions. It's all about the performance and speed. When we make all these investment choices, there's always going to be the counter argument is, are you making the right investments and where and for the greater good of the consumer? So Ookla is that counterbalance for providing data to allow us to all understand that importance of performance and importance of our consumers getting that benefit of the investment. So a little bit about Ookla we're the global leader in connectivity insights. I think everybody recognizes the Speed Test brand, where you may have at one point ran a speed test on your PC and your laptop or your mobile phone and really get that understanding of how well your connectivity is. We aggregate all of that information across millions and millions of data points, 50 billion tests to date, 500 million unique users annual. to understand how well connectivity works for individual users and where the investments that are being rolled out today, if those investments are actually going to the right audience for the users and consumers to get the benefit of it. So we are the trusted data provider for regulated bodies, governments, NGOs. Everything you heard about today from the aspects of investment through Stephen's slides and the charts into Martin's overview is we're talking to all those customers. We're talking to all those regulators, those investment firms, and giving them data to provide if those working. And not only that, but giving them ideas and data and insights on where they should invest. And don't spend time investing because you already have the maximum opportunity for investment in this particular market. So let's put that investment dollar elsewhere. So we're working with the majority of the ISPs and carriers around the world. We have 15 years of proven technology purpose-built for accurate performance. So we do understand. We not only understand performance, we also understand just from a consumer aspects, speaking of investments and putting the right investments towards consumer experiences, anything that happens on the other end of consumer experience, meaning the applications, the demand side, as Facebook, TikTok, all these other application driven. That's really why we're driving all this connectivity, is because the demand is there. We also have a technology called down detector. Many has probably used down detector in the past to figure out if there was a website, a service, a bank, an airline, is it down or not? That's down detector. And we combine all this data together to give you a really holistic understanding of the connectivity worldwide. So I want to give you a few use cases of how that's actually implemented in the real world, to not just talk about Ookla and what we provide, but actually several customers and how it actually benefited them. So we help identify unserved and underserved areas. So there's an aspect of overserved, unserved, or underserved altogether. So what we provide here is a view of a particular area that shows the zip codes can be represented in large areas. So we're looking by zip code here as the inefficiencies or other data sets that doesn't necessarily represent the consumer, but represents the ISP. And a lot of cases when ISP claims that they have service in the given area, they actually don't have the necessary connectivity or the performance for the consumer. So what our data shows is there could be some areas just lacking that true performance necessary for work at home, video streaming, relaxing on a couch and watching Netflix. There are so many areas that just cannot actually have that performance for those just very simple use cases. And yes, it may not be important to some of us on the webinar that Netflix is important, but when you just take that use case of Netflix, it can expand to any other use case like video streaming, video conferencing, very important tasks that people rely on for their everyday lives. It's a critical juncture. Even just the connectivity itself to make 911 calls or anything else. When you don't have that mobile connectivity, and as we move away from landlines and move all towards mobile connectivity, it's critical that every single area has not only connectivity, but the performance necessary to make that. And as we've seen in our own data sets, and we're seeing how our data is used, more and more use cases of like critical communications, public safety, video recording, an ambulance that's using connectivity to talk to a doctor and show real live video streaming from an ambulance to the hospital before you get there of what's happening can mean minutes of just the life-saving technology that shares, okay, we understand this particular person coming into the hospital, what's happening, so we can make last-minute decisions before they get there. That's just critical. And for not having to be underserved or overserved in different areas is a critical junction point for our type of data. Another use case is broadband availability. Everybody's heard of BEAD and the BEAD funding and all the phase 2, phase 3 of those funding areas. There's billions of dollars here in the Americas and US of broadband funding that's actually giving the opportunity for states to roll out new broadband areas where it's just not available. And in the past, a lot of this funding was streamlined through a process where the ISPs gave the coverage map that shows there's already well-versed coverage here, so we don't need funding here and here and here in these different areas. However, when those decisions are made, they're using data that's really not realistic to what consumers can experience in that market. So that's why you use real-world data sets like ours that's actually coming from the users in homes, out and about, and can make decisions that are critical for broadband rollout. So this particular county in Virginia was awarded $17 million, real money, for funding to help eliminate the broadband cap using our data. And why we're involved in the WBBA is to make sure that the awareness is there, that there is critical data sets that can be used for broadband investment. And we're very happy to lead the charge on this guidebook that's very critical for the investment. So that's the main reason why I want to bring these use cases out, because it is a critical junction point, not just in the Americas, but worldwide, on how you need a better data set to help you with those funding decisions. Another one, speaking of worldwide, in Africa, sunsetting networks is a big topic most recently, especially in the non-West countries. And so one of the ones that are hugely important is when you sunset a technology like 2G, 3G, that funding that you're gaining on sunsetting an older technology and trying to build up your new technology to 5G and moving on to new and better technologies, you need the data set to tell you if there's current users utilizing that technology and how much and what type of performance are you getting, and will that area benefit from 5G technologies? And so that's another aspect of the data set, is having a compelling data set to tell you those answers, so carriers in Africa can help make those very important decisions, which is millions of dollars decisions to focus on the right area. And what's in purple is the most critical piece of this that you can see on the screen, is hesitant to risk service disruptions and incur the significant investment by planning in the right areas. And that's, again, the really key aspect here, is making those right decisions for the broadband investment. It's all part of this guidebook. As you hopefully are already downloading it, reading through it, is we give you a lot of this information in that guidebook to help see and experience those use cases from other countries, and maybe help you as a consumer and reader of the guidebook to make those decisions as well. So my last slide, I just want us all on the webinar to think big. Broadband funding is available for more than just infrastructure. So don't just think of it as infrastructure. And I put out the purple points, is I want to call that out, is accessibility to broadband requires 4 components: infrastructure, affordability, equipment, and knowledge. Knowledge is the key, and that's what the guidebook is here to help with, is that knowledge. Infrastructure is an essential piece for anyone in any community. Yes, it's very critical, but let's look at affordability. Often drives the last two requirements. Affordability, if you build it, will people come? Can they afford it? And that's where other funding is coming from, not only to build it out, but help bridge that gap of consumers that can't afford it to bring them along, get them onto the connectivity platform so we can lead the charge into the next generation technology in the network and bring them along on that journey as well. And lastly, just a phased approach to retired networks. Consideration for affordability and coverage is essential to maintain digital inclusiveness. Let's get rid of older technologies, move them on to newer technologies, allow them to experience faster, better networks, more connectivity, more resilience, more reliability. All this together is really the whole goal of WBBA worldwide, as well as this part of this broadband advocacy, our work group that we're talking about, as well as this white paper that we just released. So tracking all of these are primary elements, key understanding of the digital divide and key to invest in the right areas. So I'm going to pass back to Stephen as well.
Yes, thank you, Kevin. Very, very interesting there. And just one sort of question from my side. So how good generally do you think is the information available to governments, operators and other stakeholders on broadband availability?
Yeah, there's a lot of data sets out there right now. It's just the deciding factor is what's the right data set to tell you the right things. And that's the number one goal for UCLA, is to be involved in associations like the WBBA, because we can come together not only with the data set to tell you those important facts, but bring it to association that can spread the word worldwide and tie it to different research to allow you to connect the dots a little better. And that's, again, a good reason why this guidebook is so important. You bring those two pieces together and tell a better insight story, so you just don't rely on the data alone.
Great. Well, thanks for that. And now we're going to hand over to Anne-Marie de Gromard. He's Head of Net Strategy and Business Development at Swisscom.
Thanks a lot. So as we hear, that's very important to have good data. I think it's also important to know the topology of the land where you are. As you see in this build, it's really common in Switzerland. That's the way where we live. It's a beautiful place. We still have snow. I can tell you, still this weekend, I will enjoy it. If you want to come, you are highly invited. But let's go back to business. What we decided in last February in Swisscom, and we communicated it to the investor, is that we are going to go full on the direction of less copper and putting more fiber in the ground. What is important to see in the past is that we have, over the last 150 years, built all our service on all our business on this copper. We reach about a coverage with 200 mega, we reach 80% of the population. It's a huge coverage for 200 mega based on copper, one more time. And what we decided is really to make and to put in pension this copper. Why do we see that? We want really to save not only maintenance costs, our focus is really the customer, and also all the electricity which is consuming all these copper platforms that we have in parallel, and so we have to maintain. Well, how we will achieve it? About 2030, we will reach 3/4 of Switzerland with FTTH, and after that, we want to go further and to finish all municipalities of Switzerland and bringing them fiber or a mix of technology. So one-to-one, the slide that our CEO has presented in February is really that we want we will reach about 90% of coverage with 5G on the mobile side, and the rest, let's focus on wireline. Our aim is really to cover 55% of fiber optic in the next 2 years. Now we are soon reaching about 50% of it. We want to reach about 80% by 2030. And the new decision of Swisscom is really, let's decommission the network. The copper network has to be phased out. The soonest is the best, but at the right timing. And why do we want to do it? Like you see here, it's about 100 gigawatt hours that we want to save. What it means, it's about 95% of the current consumption of electricity into the access network of Switzerland. So it's a huge number for Switzerland. If you would be doing doing the mathematics to see in each country how much it is, it's a huge number. After 2030, soon after, we want to bring fiber optic in each country and finish the work. Let's dig a bit more in the detail of the complexity of what we are having. Today, our issue are as follows. We are having some deadline in terms of energy consumption. I mentioned already the big figures, and we see a huge savings potential by moving the customer and the platform to fiber. The second point is really we see the building and the central office that we are using. Some building owner wants us to go away, and we see also that sometimes it's a good case to go away from one building, because in the middle of the city, it's really interesting to go or to minimize surface on the building. And this, we see already that by 25, we need to reduce and to leave some central office. The third issue that we have is really the copper technologies. We see that some providers are going to no more invest in development of chipset. They already announced it, and now we will have to react on this issue. So which means that in the midterm, we will have no more spare parts to replace. We need to move on this one. It's not only an issue with equipment provider or chipset, it's also an issue of people and knowledge how to splice and to maintain a copper network. I think here we should not also underestimate the fact of transforming people in the direction of fiber. The next one on cost. It's not a surprise to nobody. We have really the pressure on the cost also, and we need to build on the most efficient way. We see also in parallel that the player, we have alternative investors, which are interesting also to build in Switzerland. And here we put really under pressure to be the first one. And we have found new solution how to tackle also this. And the last point is the regulatory effect in Switzerland. We have been blocked to roll out point-to-multipoint architecture, and we will transform about 500,000 customer and apartments in point-to-point to enable, again, to market those locations. On the right side, you see we are nearly halfway, and we are really increasing the tempo of construction. In the last 2 years, we have tripled the number of buildings that we reach with FTTH. So the tempo of construction is extremely increased without having a cost on the quality. Quality is not mentioned, but it's really also very important. So what's the plan for us? What we are forcing to do, like I mentioned already, we are going to reach 80% of FTTH to be marketable by end of 2030. Outside this, what we foresee is really to use alternative technology in the access. In alternative net technology, what I mentioned is really 5G fixed wireless access. We are thinking also of millimeter wave. We see also a relevant solution with satellites. LEO satellite might be also to be considered how you bring fiber or fiber speed at the level of big mountains. What we do also is newly is really to do the phase outs and really consequently. So we need to maximize the number of surface that we build with FTTH or mixed technology to enable to have the customer migration and get and switch off on a regional base all the copper. Like I mentioned, it's really important to have this balance. What we want to do is really on the migration of the customer. We have done an agreement with our customer-facing units, whether it's on the customer side, B2C side, or business to business, or also on our wholesale market, how we are going to deal. What we want is use the timing of building the network to migrate at the same time the customers. That's extremely important. On the cost side, we have also analyzed a few ways. We are doing also cooperation with electricity company. We are building and sharing the investment, and that is a very interesting way how we reduce costs. not only on the building side, but also on the maintenance side. And last but not least, the Swiss federal government has already published the possibilities that they would co-finance the non-economic regions. That's a bit really the gray and the blue, light blue part of Switzerland. And this is going surely to help us also in the last part of Switzerland. With this, like I mentioned, we are really proud to build and maintain the network of Switzerland. As you see, in this small country, we are only 5 million homes there, but the diversity of situation is big. We have already built most of the center of the city, and now we are going to rural, and this is really the next step and the next level for Swisscom.
Thank you. That was really enlightening and great to hear an operator case study there of investment in broadband infrastructure. I suppose one question from my side in all of this. I mean, how important do you think is the ability to decommission the copper network for the FTTH and FWA rollout business case?
It's a very relevant part. Comparing the effect of gaining customer or maintaining your customer base, it's nearly the same effect of bringing the customer fast from copper to fiber. So the effect of decommissioning copper is nearly equivalent to the revenue effect of fiber. So half-half.
That's very interesting to know. And yes, we see more and more operators developing concrete plans for copper network decommissioning. Now, we've got a little bit of time now at the end of the session here for audience Q&A, and I know we've had a few questions come in. We might not have the opportunity to go through all of them, but I suppose one other question for you, Anne-Marie. I mean, something about obviously the rollout of FTTH can be quite capex intensive. Is there anything that Swisscom has done to reduce the capex burden of rolling out an extensive FTTH network, as you discussed? That's a question that we've had.
Yeah, so we are really running innovation systems. The first approach that we did is really to work in cooperation with electricity and utility companies. We are building the network together. We are sharing the infrastructure and the CapEx part and also the OpEx. And once this is built, then we are really open on an open market. And we have seen that being in an open market, but sharing the cost of infrastructure is a very attractive business case. On top of that, what we see is really the possibility to focus on quality, because either you pay the quality at the end of the rollout, or you take care of quality at the beginning of rollout using AI system, like we are using Diplomatic as embedded quality systems. And this is a really important way to save money, is do the first time right and not wait for the customer migration to solve the issue at the last minute.
Yes, first time right is something that's coming up a lot. And yes, I think one of the things also that the guidebook talks about is the different ways that investment can be shared as well. So I definitely think that is important. So that's great to know. And we've had another question here that I think Kevin can maybe talk about. So a question of in terms of speed, how many megabits of speed do you need for streaming services, and is speed important after a particular threshold? What are your thoughts on that one, Kevin?
Yeah, that's a great question and a great debate among providers as well as data sets like us. Obviously, for streaming technologies, streamers have a huge amount of technology built up to allow you to stream on very low speed networks. They built that over time. It's because it's important to make sure that you're adapting to the capabilities of the network. And so, for a good streaming experience, you need FCC just changed their definition to 20 megabits, but you can do a lot of streaming capabilities on 10 as well. So, you can have very low experience for speed. But what we always strive to communicate is it goes way past performance and speed. It goes through consistency, reliability, latency is all key contributors. And overall, that whole consumer experience is far beyond speed. Are there going to be use cases that require future and faster speeds and we move into 2025 and 2026? Yes. There's going to be a lot of use cases with, just tipping the iceberg of metaverse, Apple Vision Pro, new types of ways to experience your computer, logging in, and video conferencing. So right now, today's applications, I think the speed threshold is around 20 to 25 megabits. But let's all keep in mind that we're just on the forefront of really compelling use cases and consumer experiences that not only need faster networks, but needs consistency, needs higher bandwidth, larger spectrum, because you're adding more and more smart things, IoT devices, your Amazon devices, your Siri devices, and everything is being built with an AI component to it. And those need a higher threshold, higher bandwidth to allow you to experience those all at the same time. And that's the most important pieces of the conversation of performance. Let's think of way past speed, and let's think about other aspects, other metrics beyond speed. And that's the important thing that we need to look for going forward.
Yeah, so speed is important, but certainly not the only part of the story there, by any means. So a question, I think, for Martin as well. One of the questions here, which of these ways that you discussed to improve the viability of investment in broadband infrastructure, are there any of those that you would highlight as particularly important? Yeah,
I mean, I think there are some initiatives, for example, around the improving the administrative processes. They're obviously very important to reduce those costs. Reducing barriers, sharing infrastructure is also very important as well, and that was talked about by Emery there as well. That sharing infrastructures with electricity providers, and that can be very important. Getting public and private investment together, different ways of doing that. That's important. Digitization of the economy. So a broader investment in terms of digitization, in terms of standards and technologies, not just in connectivity, but also broadly. And I think the other important thing as well is looking at where fiber is going to go next. So looking at fiber going to buildings, fiber and encouraging policies to encourage getting fiber where it's needed as well. And there are a couple of important initiatives to highlight.
Yeah, so there's definitely multiple things going on here, multiple opportunities and multiple initiatives that different stakeholders could take. Now, I know there are some questions that we haven't been able to attend to, but we're just sort of running short of time here, so we can follow up on any that we haven't had the opportunity to answer today. So that's all the time that we have for questions for now. I would like to thank all our participants, Solange Zhu, Modena Brand, Kevin Hazley, and Emery de Gromard, and myself, Stephen Wilson. So we really appreciate your time and expertise on today's topics to all our webinar participants. So thank you as well to the World Broadband Association, as well as to everyone in the audience today. We do very much appreciate your attention and participation. So within the next 24 hours, you'll receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to the presentation. Please feel free as well to invite your colleagues and peers who may not have been able to listen to the event today. And then just worth noting that this webinar is copyright by Informa. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by Omdia, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. Once again, on behalf of our guests and from the World Broadband Association, I'm Stephen Wilson, and thanks for your time and have a great day. Thank you, everyone.